Are you ever awake at night and frustrated that you can't sleep? I know it happens to me more often than I'd like. And in that time, have you ever wondered what the Bible says about our sleep? I'll be honest, until I had this conversation with Dr. Benjamin Long, I hadn't. But Ben offered me some great insights, and I think you're going to enjoy this conversation that I had with him. Hi, and welcome to the Grace Cycle Show with Karen Dittman, your host. This is the place where you can learn to stop striving and instead learn to rely on God's grace. Ben, thank you so much for joining me here on the Grace Cycle Show today.
Thank you for inviting me, Karen. I'm super excited.
Yeah, so I would love to hear your story to start with about how you saw God work in your life by his grace in ways that were impossible humanly, but not for him.
Right, absolutely. We had this conversation 2.5 years ago, I would have said it would never be possible for me to publish a book. That it was something that I felt like God had put upon my heart, that I wanted to write something to kind of help integrate what I was experiencing as my role as a physician and my experience in medical education and bringing my faith into that. But along the way, I just had so many no's, literally 7 no's for the people who actually got back with me. For anyone who is trying to become an author, most of the time you just don't get any reply. And you're like, well, I guess that's a no. But the no's that I got were 7 no's. After that seventh one, I was like, okay, like maybe I misinterpreted things. Maybe this is not, what I'm meant to do. But then it was January of 2024 that all of a sudden I got an email out of the blue of someone who was like, hey, Dr. Long, we're doing this guided sleep journal. Would you be interested in collaborating with us? And I was just blown away and just so clearly could see God's hand and God's grace on this journey, because after each of those no's, I went back to the drawing table. I was like, let me get this idea more concrete. Let me clarify my vision. Let me refine this and really do this work to make this book better. And then all along, God, unbeknownst to me, was cultivating this opportunity for this publication that he wanted me to be ready for. And so when I finally came to have that conversation with the publisher, they were like, oh, give us a book proposal, give us a writing sample. And hey, what's your vision for this book? And I was like, well, actually, this is the book I've been trying to write for years. And then I was able to just hand them all of those things. And that was really by God's grace that I was able to do that.
That's amazing. Yeah, because so often we're like, I'm sure I'm supposed to do this, but why? Why all the no's?
Yeah.
Why? Yeah.
And we are not a patient people. you,
No.
you know and so we God I truly believe God puts desires in our hearts and tells us these things, and then we expect, oh, is it tomorrow, is it now, is it
Hmm.
3 weeks from now? And it's like we we want that immediately, when maybe we aren't even formed into the kind of person to have the character to reflect that Christ likeness that we need to be responsible for that promise that God has for us. So in some ways, it's like you're not ready. Like within my story, it's like my initial book would not have been the journal that I had today. And thank God that I got all those no's along the way, because the product that we finally had, I was like, oh, this is what you were drawing me to. And I'm so grateful I didn't try to force this or try to do something else outside of that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I love what you said about while we're in the waiting, it's not like God's just sitting there twiddling his thumbs. He's building that character in us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
He's making us the people who can bring that message.
Hmm.
Yeah. So true. So we have chatted a little bit offline. I just wanted to ask you what insights for women who are in their 40s and 50s. We know that our hormones go whack when we're in perimenopause, and it affects so much, including our sleep. And I was wondering what insights you could offer us around perimenopause and sleep.
Absolutely. And this is actually a very timely conversation, because the FDA actually just moved to remove the black box warning around hormone replacement therapy for things like hot flashes for perimenopause. That was added in around 2003 based upon some good research, but actually at that time, we found that the data that was supporting things for like breast cancer or other increased risks that they added that black box warning for were in women who were above 60, who were over 10 years outside of menopause, who were on older formulations of hormones, and really also just like prolonged use as well. So after getting, new research and new advocacy just now in November of 2025, the FDA has said, oh, actually, there's a lot here to say we need to remove that black box warning because women aren't choosing this option when, especially for like hot flashes that are disrupting your sleep, I think it's somewhere around like a 75% decrease in the frequency of hot flashes for hormone replacement therapy. So often, talk to women about that option, but that black box warning, obviously for good reason, has been a thing that kind of give people pause when we're talking about that.
Hmm. Yeah. So hormone replacement therapy is actually a really good option to
Yeah,
help.
it is. And
Hmm.
there it is nuanced. So there will be
Hmm.
some women who maybe they have a history of stroke or other conditions that hormone replacement therapy isn't an option for them. So
Hmm.
in some ways, there are some good because in that interim when the black box warning was on, medicine was looking at other options. And so we found that other medications, especially if you're having a lot of sleep disruption due to hot flashes, gabapentin is a medicine that has some research behind it to kind of help with those things. So there are other options.
Hmm.
But even with all of those things, anything that is disrupting your sleep and causing insomnia, we always want to come back to some of the root problems for that. And for insomnia, that is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And what we have found is, regardless of if it's substance abuse or if it is children and you're in that season of life of children disrupting your sleep, or if you're in like perimenopause, that yes, of course we have to get to those root issues because if we're not addressing those things, then we're not going to make much progress. But then the next layer of that is really how do I respond to sleeplessness? So just like anyone else who's experiencing that throughout life, coming back to the basics of what are thoughts and behaviors that might be interrupting my sleep and perpetuating my insomnia.
Yeah. And I know it is so easy to fall into the when I don't sleep well, I get up, I start drinking coffee or tea, but most of us
Hmm.
it's coffee. And so and Coke,
Yeah,
so, it's
yeah,
putting in the caffeine to keep me going all day.
yeah.
And then the wine to help me relax and fall asleep at night. But
Yep.
that becomes a disruptive cycle too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So many people get caught up in that. And the thing on both sides is that, the caffeine, it really doesn't actually make us more awake. Actually, what caffeine does is it blocks our ability to perceive our sleepiness. And so that's why when the caffeine wears off, you feel really sleepy. It's not because all of a sudden it made you more awake and now you're less awake. It's if I have this underlying poor sleep, and so I'm going to experience that sleepiness, it just gives me a reprieve from experiencing that. So if I'm not addressing those baseline things, the caffeine can only do so much. And on the flip side, I frequently will have people who will self-medicate with alcohol or something like that. And yes, it does help you fall asleep, but the interesting thing about alcohol is as it's metabolized in our body, it kind of flips and it becomes a stimulant in a way that it disrupts your sleep. And so oftentimes we will see in the sleep lab if someone has had alcohol, they get to sleep really quick and they're able to fall asleep, but the second half of their night, they're waking up actually more frequently. So it hurts you in the long run.
Yeah. And of course, no judgment. Sometimes we do what we feel we have to do, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's really interesting that caffeine just blocks the perception of being sleepy or tired.
Hmm.
I never
Hmm.
knew that before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I think so many of us are running around sleep deprived. And then if we're just blocking that feeling of sleepiness, are we really functioning at our best then?
Yeah, absolutely. And my job, that how I see it as a sleep medicine physician, is I'm coming alongside you. You're on this journey, kind of in the sleepless night. And so many times the route that we're getting at is how is my life organized or maybe unorganized in such a way that I'm not getting the sleep that I need. And so, first thing that I start off, if we were sitting down for a conversation, is walk me through a typical day from the moment you wake up to the moment fall asleep. Let's go through it and see kind of what's going on. And in our lives and culture today, it is so easy for everything just to fill up and to become so busy and have so many demands that our sleep suffers as a side effect of that.
Yeah, I talk about being on the hamster wheel of life. We're just
Yes.
going and going. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Let me ask you this, because I think I've heard a lot of different things over the years just about caffeine. And oh, you shouldn't have caffeine before or, after like 10 in the morning because then you won't sleep well. Or,
Hmm.
and I think part of it is all of our bodies metabolize at a different rate. But what would you say is ideal timing on average for that cup of coffee?
Yeah. You, I think, are, right on it in that everyone is slightly different. About 10 hours before you fall asleep is a good rule of thumb. I tell people all the time, if you are coming to me and you say after dinner I have a cup of coffee and then I go to bed and you're like, I feel refreshed when I wake up, I have no problems falling asleep and everything is totally fine, then I'm like, okay, like I don't think that's necessarily the best thing in the world, but it's not really impacting you, so I'm not going to do anything about it. But if you come to me with sleep problems and you're telling me you're having that coffee after dinner or something like that, then it's kind of like we got to peel those things back because we know that they can definitely be contributing. And especially in our age of like, for my younger kiddos and teenagers, like energy drinks and all these other kind of hidden other sources of like caffeine, then we're getting to more other kind of side effects and jitteriness and anxiety and things of that nature that I'm like, it's almost like a detox. We got to pull that off
Hmm.
as well.
Yeah, good. All right. So you are both a sleep doctor and a theologian, which is fascinating. And I would love to hear from you what the Bible can tell us about our sleep.
Yeah, I have been fascinated just starting it off with a curiosity of like, what does the Bible actually say about sleep and sleeplessness? And if you just do a quick word search, it comes up a lot.
Hmm.
Immediately in the beginning of Genesis, when God puts Adam to sleep in order to, bring Eve, there's this really beautiful thing right at the outset of this creator creature distinction and God using sleep in order to help us participate in blessing and relationship and righteousness, even. The interesting thing in Genesis, if I can nerd out about the Bible for a little bit,
Go
is
ahead.
that yeah, is that that word tardima in the Hebrew, the next time that it is used is when Abram, who becomes Abraham, is forming the covenant with God and have the animals that are split in half, then God walks through it as the pillar of fire. That same word, which is often translated for deep sleep, those are the first two times that it's used in the Bible. And so definitely when we are reading through Genesis and those words are kind of popping up, the authors of the Bible love to repeat in order to kind of tell that story and for helping us to reflect on the story and the grander narrative that the Bible is presenting of redemption. And so there's this beautiful parallel between Abram and Adam, and that God sees that for both of them, something is not good. Man is alone for Adam, and Abram has no descendants. And then he casts this deep sleep upon them and then provides something for them so that they can continue to flourish with Eve and then with the promise of descendants. And so I think from the very outset of the Bible, we get this picture of sleep as coming from God. And then that is being developed in the rest of the biblical narrative as sleep, along with everything else, is a gift. All creation, all existence is a gift of our creator God. And that is a very different understanding of the universe and reality compared to what I'm going to get if I just go to a practitioner for cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia.
Mm. I love that sleep is a gift from God. And this idea that through sleep, God can give us good gifts.
Yeah, and I think it is. We'll have to look it up. it's either Isaiah or Jeremiah that it says something like, I awoke and I saw that my sleep was good for me. And, when we I now when I read sometimes like passages like your mercies are new every morning, then sometimes I go back like that's someone who's had a really good night's sleep. And that what a gift that is that I whatever can happen, I can have all this frustration, I can have a problem or something like that, and God has given us this real embodied experience that I fall asleep and then next morning that problem can be solved, it can be gone, I can see it in a new light, or I can just be refreshed. So it is this real blessing of sustainment and provision in a way that we don't always think about in our kind of modern supernatural versus natural divide and
Hmm.
post-enlightenment world.
Yes, yes. Not to mention our hamster wheel culture that kind of devalues sleep.
Absolutely. Luckily, I feel like there is getting a little bit more of a narrative on the importance of sleep and that we're hearing that more often. And sometimes, unfortunately, to swing to the other side, in some ways, there is this idolizing of sleep and that same kind of self-care message that can very much become I need to prioritize my sleep so that way I'm going to be able to function, when another really beautiful passage that we see in both Exodus and Deuteronomy is talking about this communal nature of sleep. So it's talking about a poor man, and it says if you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, then you're to return it to him by sundown. And in Exodus, it says something like, for what will he sleep in? Because I will hear him. He'll cry out to me, and I will hear him, for I am gracious.
Mm,
And, you know, it's this beautiful picture of this person who had their cloak taken from them as a pledge. They're in debt to this person for whatever kind of a reason. And so they really have no claim for their cloak to be returned. And yet, God in his graciousness is saying, this poor person is suffering from their sleeplessness and the cold and the night, that you are to return that cloak back to them. And then later in Deuteronomy, when that's kind of being played with to show different sides of the law, it says it'll be counted to you as righteousness, I believe is what it says. That this right relationship, that not only is it my sleep, but it's also the sleep of my neighbor. And that's this beautiful thing that we get from sleep in the biblical narrative, is it takes us out of this self-care me sleep that we so often see in our current culture, and it helps us reflect, am I keeping the cloak from somebody in my life?
mm,
Is there someone that I need to be returning that cloak to them to kind of help their sleep? A very
mm.
common thing that I see in my clinic for this is newborn infants and moms who are waking up all throughout the night. And dads, I love you. I'm a dad, but there are some dads who just don't get up in the night. And I'm like, hey, like I know you got a job. I know you've got all your same stressors. Totally get it. But your wife needs your support. We need to think of ways that you can kind of do this together. So it's not just your sleep, my sleep, and then my wife's role is to take care of the baby and do all this stuff. Like finding ways to come together to be able to support one another's sleep is just one. I could say a lot more.
I'm sure there are a lot of ways. And even just considering relationships, have I taken somebody's cloak in the sense of something I'm doing might be worrying them or upsetting them and
Yeah.
keeping them up at night?
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. You think like bosses who don't really have boundaries and they're sending texts all through the night or something
Mhm.
like that, or you don't think about, oh, I'm just going to say this like little piece of feedback to this person right at the end of the day, and I'm not going to think about it the rest of the night, without thinking about that's going to keep them up all during the night too. So it
Mhm.
really does kind of put you into a mindset of how can I steward the sleep of the people that I'm in relationship with.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, that is really important. Working, being community. This is what love looks like, right?
Yep.
It's not just about me taking care of myself, but in a sense, I'm helping take care of others and trusting them to take care of me too.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's the picture of sleep that we get on a grander scale, is that God does not sleep.
Mm.
It says that in Psalm 121 that he never slumbers nor sleeps. And we can convince ourselves, especially in our modern culture, that everything relies on me. If I don't hustle and do this or accomplish this goal or do this thing, then things are not going to happen. And so I can't go to sleep. I have to. I love in Psalm 127 where it talks about it is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, it says in the RSV version, for he gives to his beloved sleep. And the prior verse in Psalm 127 talks about, unless the Lord builds the house, he who builds it builds in vain, or unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman is watching in vain. So it's like, unless God is the one that is sustaining things and holding things together, then really what we are doing is just vapor. It is vain. And so it's this invitation for us to remember that gift, that sleep is this beautiful thing that God is inviting us to experience, to show this is a blessing and a love in a real tangible way that God has given to us that we get to experience every single night.
Mm. And then I'm just looping back in my mind to your story of writing the book and the journal and how, through this time, in a sense, you had to sleep on it, metaphorically, right?
Mm,
You had to continue, just waiting. And then in his time, he brought it to fruition.
absolutely.
Yeah.
If nerding out a little bit about neuroscience too, when we're
Yeah.
thinking about sleep, one of the core kind of important things that we get with sleep is memory consolidation and learning. So as we are learning a new skill, our sleep is like a critical component to like anchoring that into our mind. And so in this real way, all human understanding relies on God and God's grace, because I can learn and study as much as I want, but the process of me retaining that skill and memorizing it happens in my sleep, which is something I have absolutely no control over. So, in this very real way, all human understanding comes from God, and that He's the one who is giving us sleep.
Mm. So I'm hearing that for a college student, it's better to go to sleep than to pull that all-nighter studying.
Yeah, absolutely. If
Mhm.
you are studying and then get a little sleepy and then kind of put your head down, that sleep is great. That's, helping to kind of upload all of that stuff that you're trying to intake in
Mhm.
order to be ready to use that the next day.
Mhm. And there's so much that goes on in our brains when we're asleep. We could probably talk for hours about that, couldn't we?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to find out more about your book, the sleep journal that you wrote, and tell me about this.
Yeah, so the book is Sleep Habits Journal: Practices, Prayers, and Devotions to Ease Your Sleepless Night. I like to say it is the insomnia book for Christians who hate to read.
Hmm.
Because unlike a traditional kind of nonfiction trade book, you don't have to read an entire chapter before you get to the application. The journal is set up in a way that there are all these bite-sized little activities. Because in my mind, as I was making this, I'm picturing, that woman who has so much on her plate. The last thing she can think about tonight is trying to implement what I'm writing in my book. And so she just has a couple of moments that she needs something to be either maybe uplifting or push in the right direction, or a little kind of tidbit to help her along her way. And that's what this book is that you can open to any kind of activity. And in one way or another, it's going to be designed to kind of help walk you slowly along on this journey. And so the whole book is arranged around what I call the sleepless night rules. If you've ever done cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, you'll see that it definitely is influenced by what's called the stimulus control instructions, which is the idea in psychology that what wires together fires together. So if you are in your bed, tossing and turning, getting frustrated, and you do that night after night, week after week, and year after year, you've conditioned yourself for the bed to be this frustrating place that you're awake. And so the therapy is to break that association by getting you out of your bed or out of the bedroom. And so the sleepless night rules consist of rule number one is to cease before bed and wait to feel sleepy. So actually drawing a line into the sand to stop from your day, get ready for bed, and then not lying down until you're actually starting to feel sleepy. And then once you lay down, if you're unable to fall asleep, then actually rising and getting out of bed. And then while you're out of bed, connect with God and wait to feel sleepy. And then when you lie down again, you repeat. So, if I lay back down and I can't fall asleep, you do the same thing. You rise out of bed, connect with God, wait to feel sleepy until sleep falls. And then the last rule is resist sleeping in and taking naps. And so having these guardrails of the sleepless night rules are something that you can always come back to no matter what season of life that you're in, that these are your guardrails to help prevent your insomnia from perpetuating and continuing to be a chronic issue. But the sleepless night journey, it is not linear. It is a lot of times it's three, one step forward, three steps back kind of a thing. So the great thing about the journal is it's really accessible. It's not like if you step away from it for several months and then you come back to it. Whereas like a chapter book, you might be like, wait, where was I? And like, how do I jump into this again? Kind of a thing. All you have to remember is go back to the sleepless night rules, and then it's set around those rules. So that way, let's say you are having difficulty rising out of bed. You're like, I am laying in bed and I know I'm supposed to get up, but I always hear that voice in the back of my head of like, well, maybe I'm just about to fall asleep. Like maybe if I turn over and do this and kind of get a little bit more comfortable, maybe then I'll fall asleep. And so you can turn to that chapter, and there is a bunch of activities and education and devotions and prayers and things of that nature to bring these two disciplines together to say, okay, what are we doing when we are rising? So we are in a real way, this becomes this pivot point in your night where I can either continue with my tossing and turning and frustration, or God has brought me to this sleepless night, and I can turn toward Him, trusting that He cares for me and cares for my sleep. And so, in a real way, it brings out this character formation that's happening in us in the sleepless night. That when we choose to rise out of bed, connect with God, we're choosing trust. We are trusting God with our bodies. And that I try to kind of bring back to us is yes, these rules are going to make your sleep better. But beyond that, as Christians, my whole goal is to bring our sleep and bring our lives back to the foot of the cross and back to God. And so, in a way, it is that spiritual journey that it is forming you to be a person who trusts, to be a person who's turning to God when you're experiencing those difficulties.
That is great. So, I'm wondering if you can offer us just some practical suggestions along those lines that we could implement tonight if we needed to help us get a better night's sleep.
Absolutely. So those rules are always, like my publishers hate when I say this. You don't have to buy my book to do those rules. You could literally start them and do them tonight and always have those things to come back to. And the fun part for me, I guess fun, I don't know if that's the best word for it, but the fun part for me in accompanying people in their sleepless night journey is that there's so many different barriers to good sleep. And so what might work for you may not be what someone else needs. And so I try to kind of break this down, simplify it into archetypes or profiles. So one that is a very common one is the overthinker, or also sometimes I call the clock watcher as well. The overthinker is the one who's worrying about everything that happened from that previous day. I can't get that off my mind, and that's just like what's going through my mind. Whereas the clock watcher is someone who's like looking at the clock and they're like, okay, if I fall asleep now, I will sleep for 7 hours, now 6 hours, now 5 hours, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And then sometimes, often, kind of the byproduct of that is then worrying about the next day, of like, and I'm going to be exhausted and, this is going to happen. You can start catastrophizing a little bit. And of course, these aren't discrete. An overthinker can also be a clock watcher or whatever in between. But those are two profiles that are very common that I see. So if you are that clock watcher, one thing that I often talk to people about is like, hey, where's your phone? And like, what are you looking at? Because if you have a clock that you keep on looking to, then I'm like, just get rid of your clock, or turn it around, or don't have it to where you can see it, because that might be the thing that's kind of provoking some of that anxiety. Or if people are on their phone and they're always like checking their phone, that can also overlap into the doom scroller who is just on their phone, going through their phone, and that is the big barrier to your sleep. So kind of both of those things, I'm just like, disconnect from the phone. Have a place that is not within arm's reach to put your phone and have it be somewhere else. So like for me, I have it in my bathroom, so I use it as my alarm, so I have to actually get up out of bed and walk to my phone in order to turn it off. And that sometimes helps me not snooze, for the most part, but everyone has those days. And so for those people, then you can do those kind of simple things to try and think about your habit and the behaviors that you're having and try to disrupt those a little bit. So a simple habit is I have some kind of cue. So for the clock watcher, I can't fall asleep. My behavior is I am looking at the clock because I can't fall asleep. And then my consequence is I see what time it is and then I start worrying. And then that kind of feeds into now because I'm worried, I can't fall asleep. And you get into a cycle. And so
Mhm.
I try to help people kind of shift their mindset to look at all of these little habits that are in their sleepless night and figure out what is my cue, what's my behavior, and what is the consequence of that thing, and find those ways to disrupt those habits in order to kind of create better ones.
I love it. I love it. Well, where can we get your book? Is it on Amazon, I'm assuming?
It is, yeah. So if you go to sleephabitsjournal.com, then
Okay.
you'll have all of the retailers. If you're someone you're like, I just want to go and buy it somewhere. If you're in America, then Barnes and Noble would probably be your best bet. You can look online to see if your local one has it. But otherwise, Amazon or a lot of online retailers, I really love to send people to bookshop.org because when you buy from there, then you can also kind of send the proceeds to a locally owned bookstore in your area too.
Oh, that's awesome. That is
Mhm.
great. What would be one big takeaway you would want our listeners to leave with after this conversation?
Yeah. The huge, beautiful picture that I never can get past, that I always come back to as someone who studies sleep in the Bible, is this beautiful picture of that we have a God who never sleeps. He never grows weary. He has no need for sleep. And yet, entering into the world as Jesus incarnate, fully human, experiences sleeplessness and suffering from sleeplessness. And like, I don't know about you, it would be hard for me to never have to sleep and never experience sleeplessness and then to choose to enter into that and experience
Mm.
that suffering. And then as Jesus, dies and is resurrected and is in heaven, now giving us the Holy Spirit is available to us to empathize with us and comfort us and in a real way empathizes with what it means to experience sleeplessness. That is this beautiful triune picture of God that we get in a real tangible way in the Bible. Insomnia is such an isolating experience. You can feel like you are so alone. It doesn't help if you have a spouse who they fall asleep at the drop of a hat and you're like, what is this? It takes me forever to fall asleep. But the grace is that there is a God who is always available to you, who can walk with you in your sleepless night.
That is a beautiful awareness. Thank you so much for that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that God is, He gets it. He
Mm.
gets it because He walked
Yep.
it with us. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
thank you so much for your time, Ben. And I will be sure to put the links where we can get your books into the show notes. So appreciate you joining us and offering so many insights. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Isn't that an amazing takeaway? Even though God never needs to sleep, because Jesus became human like us, He understands. He has compassion for us in our sleepless nights. Maybe you've heard some of these sleep rules that Ben talked about, but his encouragement to not only get up out of bed when you can't sleep, but also take that moment to connect with God is beautiful. And Ben's sleep journal offers many different ways you can do that in your sleepless nights. This could easily be one simple change for you to implement as part of the grace cycle to help you sleep better. If you're not sure about the grace cycle and what it means, then you could go back to listen to season 1 of this podcast, or even more simply, head over to my website at KarenADittman.com to get a copy of the chapter on grace from my book, Thriving in Grace, Unleashing Wellness from a Biblical Perspective. Well, that's all I have for you today. Until next time, remember, get curious, stay connected, and live in grace.